everyone, and welcome to ProLine. We're going to be taking a look at a college football preview for 2014, the SEC. I'm John Cranton in Las Vegas, joined by Jeff Sod. He's been running the Las Vegas Sports Services for 14 years. We're going to get into every team, returning starters, and how they are projected to do for this fall. But first, if you want to get on board with Jim Feist, he has an early bird special for football. You get the entire NFL preseason. That's 4 weeks in August football, including his preseason game of the year for $29. Just call 1-866-841-1655, and you want to get in early. And Jeff, they can do something similar with Las Vegas Sports Services.
Yeah, you get the entire preseason, the entire month of August. All the 5-star players each one is for only $19. Last year, I had 5 plays rated 20 stars or higher. I won 4 of them. So get on board. Call over your sets at 1-866-575-8916. Get the entire NFL preseason for only $19. 1-866-575-8916. The time to call us now because the prices get more expensive as we get closer. 1-866-575-8916.
All right, let's get right into the SEC. The SEC has won 7 consecutive national titles until last year when Florida State upended them, and even then they got Auburn to the title game, coming up just a hair short in a 34-31 thriller. That was the first time since Texas back in 05-06 that a non-SEC team had won the whole thing. Last year we had Alabama and Auburn both 7-1, but Auburn they were the miracle team. They pulled that shocker over Alabama 34-28, a thriller, and then they routed Missouri in the SEC title game. An amazing story of 59-42. They beat Missouri. So let's start with the SEC West and Auburn, and I've got a sheet from a year ago. The betting odds, Auburn Tigers were 150-1 to win the whole thing, and they almost did. How do they look for this fall, Jeff?
Well, there won't be 150-1 this year.
Not at all.
Last year they were 12-2 straight up and against the spread. This year they returned 7 offense, 6 on defense. Last year they averaged 39.5 points per game, led the nation in rushing, 328 yards per game. This year, John, there are at least 8 schools in the SEC who have new quarterbacks, but Auburn, luckily, doesn't have to worry about that. They have Nick Marshall back. Last year he threw for nearly 2,000 yards and 14 TDs, ran for 1,068 yards and 12 touchdowns. They have to replace Trey Mason at running back, and Corey Grant made a case for himself in the spring game when he rushed for 128 yards on 5 carries and a touchdown. Cameron Artis-Payne had 97 yards on 12 carries and a TD in that game. 4 starters returned to the offensive line, and 4 of the top receivers are back. Defense was 12th in the conference last year in yards allowed, but they made up for it by being 10th in the country in red zone defense. Casanova McKenzie is back at middle linebacker. He was the leading tackler last year. Secondary is strong. They open at home versus Arkansas and San Jose State before playing at Kansas State, then home versus Louisiana Tech. They got LSU, South Carolina, Texas A&M at home, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Bama on the road. Unless someone can come up with a way to stop this offense, which nobody could last year, they should be right there again with another 10-2, 11-1 season, and they have a great chance to be in the Final Four in the new national championship picture.
That's right. Alabama is one team that might be able to come up with a powerhouse defense to stop Auburn, because the Tide is off a season. They went 11-2. They got five starters back on defense and 8 on offense. And here's something you don't hear very often. Alabama is on a 2-game losing streak. People probably forget they were 11-0 to start last year, and then they lost their last 2 games, the wild game there to Auburn, and then they just had nothing in the bowl game, getting blown out by Oklahoma 45-31. But Nick Saban has a ton of talent back, and on offense, he loves balance, and that's going to help the new quarterback, senior Blake Sims. He had 2 touchdowns, 0 picks, 167 yards. But the thing about Saban offense is they don't ask the quarterback to carry the load. He likes balance, and boy, this offensive line and running back absolutely loaded. 3 offensive line starters are back. Junior running back T.J. Yeldon, this guy the last 2 years, he had over 1,000 yards 2 years ago, 6.3 yards per carry. And then last year, over 1,200 yards, 6 yards per carry. Certainly an NFL talent. He's not alone with junior running back Kenyon Drake. He averaged 7.5 yards per carry, 694 yards. You still have junior wide receiver Amari Cooper. He had 1,000 yards 2 years ago, 736 last year. So really the skill positions for Alabama are absolutely loaded. And then the defense has 5 starters back. 2 years ago, number 1 in the country in points allowed. 4th last year, just 13.9 points per game, and they were 5th in total defense. They have senior nose guard Brandon Ivory back, anchoring a very strong line. Outstanding senior linebackers in Trey DePiece trade to Priest and Reggie Ragland. So they're really loaded. There are a little bit concerns about the cornerback position, especially with Eddie Jackson hurting his ACL in April. But overall, this team is loaded. And I really like what Nick Saban has done to this team as far as a message. He sat down with the players and he said, look, we lost our identity a little bit, losing those last two games. Who are we? What am I? He told them. And he told them, I want to be a physical, tough, relentless, and competitive team. And we didn't finish games last year. We are going to finish. So this is a team with a chip on its shoulder. Boy, you don't often see Alabama, or don't want to wake up a sleeping giant like Bama with a team with a chip on its shoulder. The one tough stretch schedule-wise would be October 4th through November 8th. The Tide plays 4 or 5 road games. One of those is going to be at LSU November 8th. That should be the big one. And, of course, they have the Iron Bowl rematch with Auburn. But this team's going to be loaded. I can see them running the table and being in the SEC and the national title game again. All right, Texas A&M, boy, they've been an offensive force since joining the SEC, but they do lose a special talent behind center.
Yeah, just Johnny Manziel. That's about it. But this team, is still going to be a decent team. They're 9-4 straight up, 5-8 against the spread last year, 9-4 over the total. They get 6 back on offense, 9 on defense. Aggies have a top 5 recruiting class, including quarterback Kyle Allen, who has the unenviable job of taking over Johnny Manziel. Matt Joko transferred to TCU. Their other quarterback, Kenny Hill, was suspended in March after some legal troubles. They returned 4 offensive line starters. They lost the 2 top rushers, but juniors Trey Williams and Trey Carson are back. They lost, of course, Mike Evans went to the NFL at wide receiver, but the senior Malcolm Kennedy and returns along with freshman Ricky Seals-Jones. They also have a top recruit at receiver, Speedy Noel. That's a great name for a receiver. Defense last year allowed 6.4 yards per play and 222 rushing yards per game. Hopefully, they'll improve with those 9 starters back. And the good news is they recruited defensive end Myles Garrett, the top prospect in the state. They opened at South Carolina before home games versus Lamar and Rice. 3 more tough conference road games against Mississippi State, Alabama, and Auburn. They get Missouri and LSU at home. So we have a freshman quarterback here, but an improved defense. I don't see them winning more than 2 road games, though, John. So I'm looking at an 8-4 season for A&M.
I see LSU Tigers as being a powerhouse in the SEC this fall. Miles has 7 starters back on offense, 4 in defense, and they are off back-to-back 10-3 campaigns, 8-4-1 run over the total last year. And there aren't many teams in the country that can say that they averaged over 200 yards rushing and passing per game. Well, LSU was one of them, 35.8 points per game. They got 7 starters back on offense, 251 yards passing. Do have a new quarterback in sophomore Anthony Jennings. You probably got to see him if you watched the bowl game. They played Iowa, and Jennings stepped in and replaced injured Zach Mettenberger. You know, for the game, he was only 7 of 19, 82 yards. But that was against a great Iowa defense. And he's not going to be alone because you got 4 or 5 starters returning on the offensive line. This LSU offensive line is going to be one of the best in the SEC. And they pick up, well, first of all, they have a couple of returning running backs in senior Terrence McGee and Kenny Hilliard. McGee averaged 7.3 yards per carry, but a guy to keep an eye on is a running back prospect, and Leonard Fournette. He's a freshman and has been compared to Adrian Peterson, the top running back prospect in the nation. So he will definitely see some time. And the wide receivers are very good shape too. You got speedster Trayvon Durrell. He was very fast, and talented freshman Malaki Dupree is in. He is a top recruit. In fact, one national recruiting organization had him number 1. So this team has some young wide receivers, but really a lot of talent. And then the defense, they allowed 22 points per game last year. That was 22nd in the nation. They do have some starters to replace on the front 7, but overall there's a lot of talent at linebacker. They have junior Daniel Hunter, who's going to step in up front, and he had a tremendous spring. And in the secondary, there's some youth there with sophomore cornerbacks Rashad Robinson and Tre'Davious White. However, they played last year and played great. In fact, one of the games was against Texas A&M. They held Johnny Manziel to one of his worst college football games ever. Manziel was 16 of 41 passing, 224 yards and 2 interceptions. So LSU really is loaded on both sides of the ball, and you're going to see how good they are quickly because August 30th, they're going to be playing Wisconsin, and then things are kind of easy until October 4th. They got a big game at Auburn, and then Florida the next week. So October 4th to 11th is 2 back-to-back tough road games, and then the big one against Bama is going to be at home November 8th. Tigers are on an 8-14-1 spread run. I haven't been covering numbers. They're also 8-4-1 over the total, but this team is going to be in the 10-win, possibly even more category for this coming fall. All right, Jeff, how about Ole Miss, or I should say Mississippi State? Expectations are very high. Why is that?
Well, they finally have – this is a team that they should be the best team of Don Mullen's career there at Mississippi State. They have 18 starters returning. Last year they were 7-6, 8-5 against the spread, 8-5 under the total. The problem since Mullen's taken over is that they can beat the weak teams, but they can't beat the tough teams, especially in the conference. So this year they have no excuses. Those 18 starters, they have junior Dak Prescott is back at quarterback. Last year he had 10 TDs, 7 interceptions, 1,940 yards. Prescott also was a leading rusher with 829 yards on 6.2 yards per carry. The Bulldogs are loaded at wide receiver with seniors Jamian Lewis and Robert Johnson, plus junior Joe Morrow. The defense is solid throughout. The secondary returns 3 starters. Defensive line is deep and experienced. The middle linebacker, Bernard Drake McKinney, the leading tackler, is back. And they also have they also have an easy schedule, a non-conference schedule that they usually do. But this year they should not only beat the weak teams, but they should have a good chance of coming through and winning a couple of big games in the conference too. They should start out 3-0 versus Southern Miss, UAB, and South Alabama. And once again, we'll see if they can win the big games. They got road games at LSU and Alabama, home against Texas A&M, Auburn, and with that fairly weak non-conference schedule, they should at least win 8 games this year, John. And I don't think fans of Mississippi State will take anything less than that.
Okay, the other Mississippi school, Ole Miss, they look great too. I mean, they were off an 8-5 season, 7-6 ATS, only 3-5 in the SEC, the rugged SEC. But still, there's a lot to like about Hugh Freeze's team. He got 6 starters back on offense, 10 on defense. The offense was terrific and balanced. They averaged 30 points per game. 283.3 yards passing, was 23rd in the nation, and they averaged 190 rushing. And he's got senior quarterback Bo Wallace back. He had 18 touchdowns, 10 picks, 3,346 yards, a completion percentage of 64.8, and he's got a lot of weapons to work with. 6'3" sophomore wide receiver Laquan Treadwell is back. He had 608 yards. He got a sophomore tight end in Evan Engram, who has 268 yards and knows the system. And Treadwell caught 72 passes and was the top freshman in the SEC. And then the backfield, too, is also loaded. You got junior running backs Itavius Mathers and Jalen Walton. Both those guys ran for over 500 yards, which means the top 2 rushers are back for Ole Miss. And the defense, boy, they returned 10 starters to a unit that allowed just 23.7 points per game. They could be one of the best in the SEC. The pass rush was terrible last year, ranked 91st. However, there's a lot of talent back to be much better than that, led by the Kimdishi brothers, Robert and the junior Denzel at the linebacker spot. In fact, one of those guys was the #1 recruit as a defensive end. And they also have senior defensive end C.J. Johnson. He hasn't been healthy, but for his senior year, he looks to be healthy. They have an All-American safety in the secondary at Cody Pruitt. So it's a very solid secondary, solid defense. And the offensive line has sophomore Laramie Tunzel. He's an NFL prospect at left tackle, and they're going to be getting back junior Aaron Morris. He's at left guard, and he did hurt his ACL last year in the opener. So really, it's a lot more talent returning than even the numbers suggest. And you got 10 on defense. So this Ole Miss team really looks loaded. And you're going to see their toughest game, one of the toughest games right off the bat. It's going to be Thursday, August 28th. They're going to be opening against Boise. They get Alabama at home, which is good news, October 4th. And then they have a tough trip to LSU, and actually quite a few tough road games, A&M and LSU, but they're also going to be home against Auburn. And the LSU game, it's going to be a revenge game, but not for Ole Miss. It's a revenge game for LSU because Ole Miss had a remarkable late comeback to stun the Tigers 27-24 last year.